Hello, and welcome to the virtual Fairfield Museum. The Fairfield Museum is closed right now to the public, but we are coming to you through virtual means to tell stories about the history of Fairfield and some of the wonderful things that happened here in this town. My name is Walt Matis. My title at the Fairfield Museum is Program and Volunteer Coordinator. That means that when we have programs, part of my job is to make sure that we have volunteers and docents to help give the programs that we would be doing at the museum. Today, I am actually here at the Ogden House on Bronson Road. So we are actually at the back of the house. And so from Bronson Road, you'd see the front, but we're at the back for a very specific reason, because although we will be talking today about the Ogden House, we're actually also going to be talking about the Dooryard Garden, which is maintained for the Fairfield Museum by the Fairfield Garden Club. And we have a special guest today, Gabrielle Guise, who will be talking to us a little bit about that garden in just a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about the house and the overall property. So the Ogdens started in Fairfield about 1667 with the arrival of Richard Ogden. Richard Ogden was actually brought to Fairfield to be a miller and to open a mill. And that mill was actually on the Mill River, about half a mile to just about a mile from here, 3/4 of a mile, for grinding of grain. And the location was actually very close to the current site of Perry's Mill Pond. So that mill is there, and he ends up having a great deal of the land around that area. So from roughly Mill River all the way to actually the very edge right now of what would be the Ogden property. And then the Sherwoods actually own the property on the next side, on the other side of that. In 1750, so Richard's great-great-grandson, David III, is given the house and property. At that time, it was only 10 acres. He was given the original 10 acres as what appears to be a wedding gift to himself and his wife, Jane. Now, Jane had been a Sturgis, but when they got married in 1750, they're given a house. It's referenced as a new house, which raises a few questions about whether it was built specifically in 1750 or if there had been a house or some other structure here that was somehow modified to become the new house, the term new. So they move in 1750, and they and their just direct descendants will live in this home for approximately 125 years. Now, sometimes people think Ogden House is the oldest house in Fairfield. It is not. And to put that just into a bit of perspective, you have to remember that when this house is built or rebuilt in 1750, Fairfield at that time is already about 110 years old as a settled community. So Fairfield is very much a growing and developing area. Eventually, the area where Ogden's house stands becomes basically almost the southern edge of what will be Greenfield Parish. So this is actually already becoming a separate parish in 1725. So David and Jane will have 7 children that they raise in the house, and those children will work what is inherently a farm. Now, we said 10 acres originally. What it will eventually become is close to 79 acres. And to put that into some perspective, for as I said, we're just a little bit beyond Bronson Road here. For people who know Fairfield, the back side, so that's the front edge of the property, the back side of the property is actually Mill Plain Road. So if you know roughly where Riverfield School is, that is actually the back side of the Ogden's property. And so they're farming this property, they're raising flax and wheat and corn and other crops for sale and for their own use, the consumption of their animals. David and Jane will live here together till about 1775. In 1775, David passes away. Jane will continue to live in the house. She actually gets what's known as a widow's third of the property. And then she has 2 sons who are still here at the house, Sturgis and Abel. And so each one of them gets a third. Eventually, Abel will move out and Sturgis will buy his third. And then Sturgis will also get married. So at one point, Jane is still living in the house, along with her son and her daughter-in-law, Zoa. And so they are all living in the house, and Jane's going to be here for almost an extra 25 years after David's passing. When she passes, it will pass to Sturgis and Zoe specifically. They will have 5 children, and their daughter Ellen will be the last of the direct line of Ogdens to actually live in the house. She will actually become a Silliman. She will marry Ebenezer Silliman, and she will live until 1876, but in 1872 the property is actually sold to Henry Banks. He will live in the home till 1896, and then with his passing, it passes to his heirs. And so they don't specifically live in it. What they will do is they will use it as a rental property. So different people come to the house at different times. We think it was possibly a popular summer home for many people, but we don't have any direct records of specifically who's living in the house during most of that period. After that, it passes in 1927. It's going to pass to Benjamin Plotkin. Now, Benjamin Plotkin, only owns it for about 9 years, and unfortunately, it falls into disrepair during his time that he's in the structure or owns the structure. So that by 1931, the home is in very bad shape. So Annie B. Jennings and a woman by the name of Mary Alice, who was an antiques dealer here in Fairfield and Southport in particular, actually purchased the house. And the idea is to get it ready for the tercentenary of the state of Connecticut, for the 300th anniversary. And so they go through a process of redoing the house and fixing it and repairing it. Mary Alice has tenancy, so she will actually live in the house. We know that she's here. And then it will pass to a woman by the name of Lillian Wadsworth, who will actually own it. Now, Mary Alice still has tenancy, but Lillian Wadsworth actually owns it. But in 1973, Lillian Wadsworth will actually give the home and about a little over an acre, give or take, of property to the Fairfield Historical Society, at that time today the Fairfield Museum, and today is in the possession of the Fairfield Museum. It does open during the summer. It can be for this given year. I would suggest that you check our website to see what our schedules and how we will be opening it. But it will be open during the summer. Or could be open during the summer, should be open during the summer. The other thing I'd like to quickly mention while I'm here is there's a driveway that runs alongside, and it actually goes to Oakland Cemetery. Now, Oakland Cemetery actually opens in 1865. The bulk of the property that is today Oakland Cemetery was actually Sherwood property. In fact, we believe that there was a Sherwood home that was actually farther into the property at one time. There is a portion of the property of Oakland Cemetery that did belong to the Ogdens, which is basically as you go in the main entrance, if you stay to the right, most of that side of the cemetery actually belonged. That was Ogden property, part of that original 79 acres. So, as I said before, the other side of this site is our Dooryard garden. And as I said before, Gabrielle Guise is here to speak with us about the garden and some of its uses.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks Walt. Whenever I listen to you, I learn things, so I really appreciate the opportunity to hear more about the Ogdens. It's always fun. So what I wanted to do in welcoming you here is let you know how the outside of this yard has evolved, and I'd like you to imagine this space as essentially an outdoor museum, and to consider what we see in this space and how what we see can let us say things about early America from an ecological perspective. One thing that we might immediately notice about this space is that it's shared by native and non-native plants. So the population here represents a mixing of Indian and colonist cultures as well, and plants as well as colonist cultures. I'd like you to also think about one more thing. This space is created by human beings very much. This garden has been recreated by the Fairfield Garden Club, but the plants have a say as well. There are things that we've tried here that have failed. There are things that have shown up here or were already here that were successful. So these plants have a role as well as the people in creating this landscape. Which brings me to a final point, which is that plants do the same things that people and animals do. They simply do them more slowly. So I'd like to think about how this space has been shaped by the agency of the people who had a say, but also the plants themselves. And to do that, I wanted to look at a few examples from the garden. I have in my trug here something that I think will be familiar to many of you. And that is, oops, I'll leave that little one behind. And that is this plant, which many of you will no doubt recognize as lilac. This lilac is not a native species. This lilac originates in the Mediterranean. And we have a name, the formal name for this plant is Syringa vulgaris. Syringa is from the Greek. It references the Greek river goddess, or well, she's really more of a nymph, Syrinx. And the story goes about like this. Syrinx is doing her thing by the riverbank, and Pan, the nature god, who's a satyr and kind of a little bit of a lech, sees her and thinks, oh wow, I would like to get to know Syrinx. Syrinx wants none of that. And so she, in order to avoid Pan's advances, transforms herself into this lilac. And Pan is so distressed by this, but also so overwhelmed by the beauty of the plant, that he takes cuttings from the stems of the lilac, which is its other nickname is pipe plant, because the centers are not hollow, but they're very soft. And so he can remove the centers easily and put these reeds together to form the first pan pipes that he uses to remember Syrinx. Well, anyway, this beautiful plant, remember, plants do things for their own advantage. This plant's advantage is its beauty. It's not different from having tasty berries that the birds might eat and then distribute. Its beauty makes people carriers of this plant. So people visit the Mediterranean from the north and they say, oh wow, lilacs. And lilacs are imported to England and then eventually here. They come in 1750 with Governor Wentworth, who is the colonial governor of New Hampshire, and he plants them by his doorway, a popular spot for lilac, because he wants to enjoy their beauty and their scent. If he leaves the door open, the scent can just waft through the house, and it's spectacular. From New Hampshire, the lilac moves down into Connecticut, and eventually lilacs move west with colonists and settlers, and now spread across the entire continent. So that's the lilac doing its job of being gorgeous in order to move itself around. We've got a native beauty here. We could think of this as maybe the girl next door. These are familiar, no doubt, to some of you. This is mountain laurel. Mountain laurel is also very beautiful. It's in bloom here on property, as well as probably in many of our yards. The lilac's almost done now. And this plant is native and was valued by the Pequot community and other natives who lived in this area, and they valued it not for any aspect of its medicinal or food use, because this plant is poisonous. Every bit of it is poisonous. Do not eat the flowers, do not eat the leaves, do not chew on the twigs. The Indians knew that and were able to communicate that to the colonists. But this plant is very, very useful. It has large burls with age that are great wood for carving spoons. So the other nickname for this plant, mountain laurel, is spoonwood. Have another for you. This is another, oops, there's my little lilac bit. This is another native beauty. This is, these are done flowering now. They flowered about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And this tree is commonly known as shad blow. It's also called serviceberry. And you can see these little berries here, which are green now, but they will eventually become a deep purple. And they are delicious, both fresh and dried. The Indians and the colonists enjoyed eating them just out of hand, but dried, the Indians would make the berries into pemmican, which is a food source that combines any meat, typically in this area it would be venison, with the berries that are dried, and then it's pounded, dried again, and you have a very portable, very durable, very calorie-dense foodstuff that can sustain you through a tough winter. The colonists did use them dried as well. They used them similarly to raisins, so they put them in cakes or in porridge. And this takes me to our last plant today, which right now isn't doing much. It had flowers a while ago. They were yellow and pretty but small. This plant is the spice bush, and it is, again, a native plant. And unlike the mountain laurel, pretty much all of this is useful. You can chew on the twigs, which the natives did in lieu of toothbrushes, and the colonists learned to adopt that practice. The leaves have a nice spicy fragrance. You can make tea with them. I've tried it, it doesn't taste like much to me, but some people really love it. It's sort of a chai-like flavor. But what this plant does later on in the season is it produces little berries right along the stem. Again, they're sort of a dark color, and these berries, they're red, but a deep red. These berries, when they're harvested, can be dried, and when they're dried and ground up, they taste very much like allspice. The reason I wanted to talk about this tree is we're living in a very unique moment where many of us are making do. We want one thing when we go to the market and we come home with another. Well, this plant allowed colonists to do the same. In early America, very popular spices included nutmeg and cloves, which are native only to the Molucca Islands in what is now Indonesia. Because these spices were so popular, wars were fought over control of the Moluccas. It was held by, well, originally the people indigenous to the area, of course, but then the Arabs came in, the Portuguese came in, the English came in, the Dutch came in. Everybody wanted to control this spice trade, which meant during times of war or other unrest, access to these spices was limited. It turns out that there's a plant in the West Indies called allspice that tastes kind of close to a combination of nutmeg and clove. And this was then a good substitute, but when you couldn't get allspice either, you could go right to your backyard and find your spiceberry bush, and if you dried those berries and ground them, they tasted like allspice. So you could think of this as something 3 steps removed from the nutmeg and the cloves of the Moluccas, but a really good local resource. The leaves also, I should mention, were sometimes dried and used as bay leaf substitutes. They don't really taste like bay leaves, but why not give it a whirl when times are tough? So I wanted to just introduce you to a range of the plants that are here and encourage you, when it's safe to do so, to come and walk through this property, enjoy our signage, and give yourself a self-guided tour, or look for when the house and garden are open, and volunteers might be able to give you information as well. And the nice thing about this museum is we don't need to change the exhibits. Nature does that for us. So every time you visit Ogden, as you move through the seasons, you'll see and notice different things about the property. So I encourage you to not only come, but to come back. So thanks so much for your time today.
I'd like to say a big thank you to Gabrielle for coming today and letting us know a little bit more about this property. It's always a great experience for me to learn some new things, and I'm sure it is for you too. We really appreciate you tuning in. If you're interested on how to help us, the Fairfield Museum, and to continue our work, membership is a great way to stay in touch and know what's going on. Donations are always greatly accepted. Also, you can check out our website at fairfieldhistory.org, and there you can learn about not only the Ogden House, but also many of the other great virtual programs and opportunities that we have out there for you to be part of. So once again, thank you so very much. Hope you've enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you on the History Trail.